Hi, everybody. Welcome to Intermediate Microeconomics, Econ 306. These are going to be a series of content videos that are meant to support the information from the readings, from the PowerPoints and lecture notes I publish. For the most part, these videos are going to be going over topics that students generally struggle the most with in this class. If there's ever a topic that I don't have a content video out that you'd like to see one for, feel free to just send me an email and I'll try to put something out on that. Right, so this is going to be a video on supply, demand, and equilibrium from chapter 2 of the book. At this point, you should have kind of browsed through chapter 1. Make sure you're familiar with the definitions in there. It sort of talks about what is microeconomics, what are we trying to do in this class, and a few definitions that are useful throughout the book. So we'll start with supply and demand. Supply shows us a relationship between price and quantity that producers in a market are willing to supply. We have this idea called the law of supply that states that all else equal, as the price of a good increases, producers are willing to supply a higher quantity of the good. So what we get is this upward sloping supply curve, and it doesn't necessarily have to be linear. For the most part in this class, we'll deal with linear supply curves while also talking about what would happen if it were to be nonlinear. Right, so what this supply curve is again showing us is a relationship between price and the quantity that suppliers in the market are willing to supply. And this could be for one producer in a competitive market, or it could be the entire market. Usually we focus on the entire market. So what this is telling us is that in the entire market, at a price of 1, there are 10 total units provided. At a price of 2, there are 20, 3, 30, and so on. Right, so it's important to remember just kind of how to read a supply curve. A supply curve just tells you at any given price how many are supplied, usually by the entire market, unless it's indicated that's a supply curve for an individual. All right, one important thing to remember is that when we change price, this just moves us along the supply curve. So when the price changes from 1 to 2, we went from people being willing to supply 10 units to the market supplies 20 units. We're not actually shifting the supply curve, we're just moving to a new point along the supply curve. Right, price is on the y-axis, so we just move along the curve. So what actually shifts supply? Supply shifts are caused by factors which impact market conditions or producers' costs. So as a list, we have the number of sellers, the prices of inputs of production, technological productivity, expected future prices, and prices of substitutes and complements in production. So here we have a picture that demonstrates the difference between a movement along the supply curve. So here, going from A to B, price changes from 2 to 4, and we move from 20 units provided, 20 units supplied to 40. And then here is an increase in supply, an increase in supply or demand. I like to usually think of left and right, because an increase is always going to be to the right like this, and a decrease is always going to be to the left. That's going to be true for supply and demand. So here we have an increase to the right in supply. This could have happened for any number of these reasons, right? If we have a greater number of sellers on the market, then at each price, we have more people selling stuff, so we have a higher quantity provided at each price. Prices of inputs of production, so here, if our good for some reason got cheaper to make, now we have a shift to the right in supply, an increase in supply, where at any given price, the market is willing to supply a higher quantity. If we get improvements in technology, we could see shifts to the right in supply. Expected future prices, so here, if suppliers are expecting prices to be really high in the future, do they want to sell right now? No, they would rather wait and sell when the prices are high. If suppliers expect prices to be relatively low in the future, maybe they would rather sell now. So here we could get an increase in supply if suppliers expect that in the future prices are going to be lower than they are today. Also, prices of substitutes and complements in production. Maybe I'm a farmer, I can produce corn or soy. If the price of soybeans is really low, maybe I'd rather supply corn. So we could see an increase like that. All right. In general, we're not going to spend too much time on these particular shifts of supply and demand, but we will see movements of these curves talking about concepts like tax and externality that are going to be important to remember. You know, what goes on these graphs when we get movements of these curves, what can move the curves, and so on. Right, on the demand side, we have the law of demand stating that all else equal, as the price rises, consumers demand a lower quantity, so demand slopes downwards. As the price falls, we get a higher quantity demanded. As with supply, changes in price move us along the curve, but don't shift demand. Changes in price of that particular good. And then we have a list of things that can shift demand. So here we're showing a demand increase to the right, like supply, and increases to the right, a decreases to the left, and it's showing us that at any given price, we have a higher quantity demanded. This shift in the demand curve can be caused by this list of factors. Again, I don't want to spend too much time here because it's not going to be a main focus of the intermediate class. But increase in number of buyers could increase demand. Perhaps the consumers in the market decided they like this good more, so we get an increase in demand, higher income. We'll talk more about the prices of complements and substitutes really in chapter 4, so I'll leave that for the future. And then again, like suppliers, if you're a consumer and you expect the price to be really high in the future, maybe you want to buy now, so we get this increase in demand now. Or conversely, if you expect that the price is going to be relatively lower in the future, you wait to buy and your demand decreases. Right, finally, market equilibrium is a price such that quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. So we map out our demand. Here again, they don't have to be linear. These are non-linear. For the most part in our class, when we're calculating, we'll use linear examples, which are a little bit easier to calculate with. The intersection is a price such that the quantity supplied, Q star, equals the quantity demanded, Q star. All right, and in a future video, I will show how to calculate these mathematically. If we have an equation for demand and an equation for supply, how do we find P star and Q star?